He thought it was just a harmless prank on a royal garden till the world turned against him, and the joke nearly destroyed his life. Eric Dawson was a young man from the United States who had always been the kind of guy who made people laugh. He loved attention, loved making jokes, and most of all, he loved being on camera. He had built a small online following by recording silly videos during his travels and uploading them on social media. He called himself a global prankster, someone who could make people laugh anywhere in the world. But while Eric thought he was being funny, he often didn't realize when his jokes were crossing the line. When Eric and his group of college friends planned a trip to London, he saw it as another opportunity to record fun content. His friends were also into making videos, but none of them were as obsessed with going viral as Eric. Before the trip, he even said, "Wait till you see what I do at Buckingham Palace." His friends laughed, thinking he was just joking. Didn't expect him to actually do anything crazy. But Eric had already planned something in his mind, a stunt that he believed would make him famous overnight. On their third day in London, Eric and his friends visited Buckingham Palace. The place was crowded with tourists. People were standing behind barriers, taking pictures, watching the guards in red uniforms and tall black hats. The guards were famous for their serious behavior. No matter what happened around them, they didn't move, didn't smile, didn't speak. Tourists would try to make them laugh or talk, but the guards always stayed still. This made them even more interesting to watch. Eric stood in the crowd, looking at one of the guards. His name was Private Thomas Weller, though Eric didn't know that at the time, he only saw the guard as another statue to mess with. He whispered to one of his friends, "Watch this. I'm gonna wake this guy up." His friend looked unsure, but Eric had already taken out his phone and started recording. He was holding a takeaway coffee cup in his other hand. It was from a nearby cafe, and the coffee inside was not hot anymore. It had gone lukewarm, and Eric had only taken 2 sips. Instead of throwing it in the trash, an idea came into his mind. He looked at the guard again, smiled to the camera, and said quietly, "Let's see if this gets him to blink." Eric took a few steps forward. People around him noticed what he was doing. Some thought he was just pretending. A few began to record, sensing something odd was about to happen. Then, without any warning, Eric lifted his hand and threw the coffee right at the guard's chest. The cup hit the guard's red jacket and bounced to the ground, the remaining coffee splashing across his uniform. The guard didn't move at first. There was a shocked silence. A child gasped. A woman covered her mouth. Someone dropped their phone. Nobody could believe what just happened. Eric stood there, grinning, waiting for the laughter. He thought people would cheer or at least laugh with him.
Ow.
But nobody was laughing. Instead, people looked angry, disgusted. Some even started booing. Eric's smile faded a little, confused by the reaction. Then something unexpected happened. The guard suddenly stepped forward. His right foot slammed on the ground with a heavy thump. He raised his voice and shouted a loud warning, "Stand back from the Queen's Guard." The sound of his voice echoed through the area. It was so loud and firm that Eric stepped back, startled. Another guard came from the side, and within seconds, 2 police officers from the Metropolitan Police arrived on the scene. One of them walked straight toward Eric, hand on his radio. "Sir, drop the phone and step back, please." Eric tried to laugh it off. It was just a prank.
Ow.
The coffee wasn't even hot, he said. He showed the officers his phone and said he was filming a joke for his social media. "I'm a content creator," he added proudly. The officers weren't impressed. One of them took the phone from his hand. The other placed Eric in handcuffs. His friends stood frozen, unsure whether to defend him or stay quiet. The tourists watched as Eric was detained right there in front of Buckingham Palace. Someone in the crowd shouted, "You deserve it." Eric's heart started beating faster. He couldn't believe it. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. In his mind, it was just a joke. The coffee was cold. The guard wasn't hurt. What was the big deal? But the police took it very seriously. "You just assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard," one of them said. "That's not a prank. That's a crime." Eric was placed in the back of a police car as they drove away. He looked out the window and saw the crowd still watching, still recording. For the first time, Eric felt fear. Real fear. This wasn't a funny video anymore. This was real trouble. At the police station, they took his fingerprints, his personal information, and his phone. He was placed in a holding cell. It smelled like metal and sweat. He sat alone on a hard bench, thinking about what had just happened. His stomach hurt. He wasn't sure if it was from stress or from the awful feeling of knowing he'd gone too far. His friends weren't allowed to see him yet. His phone was taken, so he had no idea what was happening online. But videos of the coffee incident had already started spreading. Tourists had posted them on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Comments began to pour in, most of them full of anger and disappointment. People couldn't believe someone would do that to a royal guard. Some called him disrespectful, others called him trash. A few even asked for him to be banned from entering the UK ever again. Back in the cell, Eric was trying to think of ways to explain himself. Maybe he could say it was an accident. Maybe he could say he didn't know the rules. Maybe he could say he didn't mean harm. But deep down, he knew none of those excuses would work. He had thrown coffee at a soldier doing his duty. That wasn't a joke. It was disrespectful. He thought about how the guard didn't move at first, didn't react. How strong that was. How professional. Eric had tried to embarrass him, and the guard had stayed calm. Eric was the one who looked like a fool now. As the hours passed, Eric's mood changed. The excitement and energy he had earlier were gone. He felt small, ashamed, embarrassed. He remembered the look on the faces of the crowd. Nobody had found it funny. Not even his friends had laughed. They looked scared, uncomfortable, maybe even disappointed in him. Later that evening, an officer came to speak with him. "I'll have to appear in court," he said. "This is serious. May be facing charges." Eric nodded silently. For the first time in his life, he didn't have a comeback. No jokes, no funny lines, it's just silence. He was allowed one phone call. He called his father back in the US. His dad picked up, surprised to hear from him. "What's going on?" His father asked odd. Eric paused, then said softly, "I messed up, Dad. Really bad." That night, as he lay on a thin mattress in the holding cell, Eric didn't think about likes, views, or followers. He didn't think about fame or funny videos. He thought about the man in the red uniform, standing proudly, doing his job. While Eric tried to humiliate him, he realized something important. Not everything is a joke, and some mistakes are too big to delete. The moment Eric threw that coffee, everything started going downhill for him. What he thought would be a silly prank was turning into something much bigger than he ever imagined. The royal guard, even after being hit, stood strong for a few seconds, not moving a muscle. But when he finally did move, stepping forward with a loud stomp and shouting at Eric, it shocked everyone, especially Eric himself. Eric had never seen a soldier act like that up close. The loud command, "Stand back," from the Queen's Guard, wasn't just noise. It carried power, discipline, and warning. It was the sound of someone who had real responsibility, not a performer in a costume like Eric had thought. The entire crowd was stunned into silence, but not because they were amused. It was a different kind of silence, dense, cold, and full of judgment. People began recording from all directions. Dozens of mobile phones were pointed toward Eric. The excitement he once felt about being filmed vanished. His stomach tightened, laughed awkwardly, and tried to explain to those around him that it was just a prank. He even pointed to the coffee and said, "It wasn't hot, I swear, just a little splash, no harm done." But nobody smiled. In fact, people began backing away from him like he was some kind of criminal. That was when Eric felt the first wave of fear he hadn't expected. This. He thought the worst thing that might happen was a guard frowning or stepping back. He had no idea how serious the British took their royal guards. While Eric tried to make excuses, a second guard came forward. His face was stone cold, his movements sharp and quick. He didn't speak to Eric but turned to call over his radio. Within seconds, 2 police officers were pushing through the crowd, walking quickly with straight faces. One was tall and slim, the other shorter with a firm jaw. Their expressions made it very clear. This wasn't something funny. This was serious. "Step away from the guard," one of them said firmly as he reached Eric. The other officer glanced at the spilled coffee and then at the shaken tourists. Put the phone down now. Eric froze. He had never been in trouble with the police before. He didn't know what to do. Guys, it's just a joke, he stammered. I didn't mean any harm. It's for social media. I'm a content creator. The tall officer took Eric's phone from his hand. You assaulted a serving member of the Royal Guard, he said. Do you understand how serious this is? Assault? Eric repeated, confused. I didn't hit him or anything. It was just a prank. The shorter officer stepped forward. Throwing liquid at someone is considered assault under UK law, he said, especially against a member of the armed forces on duty. Without another word, they placed handcuffs on Eric's wrists. Couldn't believe what was happening. It all felt like a dream, a bad one. He looked over at his friends, hoping they would say something, maybe defend him. But none of them moved. Some had already turned off their phones. A few looked guilty, others nervous. Nobody laughed. Nobody came to his rescue. Tourists around him started whispering loudly. Serves him right. Who does that? Unbelievable. The quiet judgment from complete strangers was almost worse than the cold metal of the handcuffs. As the police walked him away, Eric heard someone say, "That man's a disgrace." His face burned with shame. His entire body felt heavy. The day had started, so normally breakfast, sightseeing, jokes, but now he was being led into a police van. The door slammed shut behind him. Inside the van, Eric sat still, trying to understand what had just happened. The more he thought about it, the more it hit him. This wasn't just a simple joke gone wrong. It was a sign that he didn't understand boundaries. He had thought being funny meant doing anything to get attention, even if it embarrassed others. But now he realized that being funny at someone else's expense, especially someone doing a serious job, was not humor. It was disrespect. The ride to the police station felt long. The van was quiet, except for the occasional crackle of the radio. Eric stared at the walls of the van. He had no phone, no friends around him, and no plan. His mind raced. Would he be sent home? Would he be put in jail? Would this become international news? At the station, the officers walked him through a set of doors. It was all new to Eric. He had only seen police stations in movies. The place smelled of cleaning chemicals and paper. He was taken to a small room where they took his fingerprints, photo, and personal details. "What's your full name?" Officer asked. "Eric Dawson." "Nationality? American?" The officer looked at him for a second longer than usual. "This incident is very serious. You'll need legal help." After processing, Eric was placed in a small holding cell. It was a square room with cold metal bars, a bench, and nothing else. He sat down slowly, feeling the weight of his mistake more and more with each passing minute. He had no idea what was going on outside the cell, but what he didn't know was that his name was already trending online, not in the way he wanted. Tourists who had recorded the incident had uploaded the videos almost immediately. Within an hour, the clip of Eric throwing coffee at the Royal Guard was spreading like wildfire. The caption, "American tourist throws drink at UK Royal Guard," was all over social media. People shared their anger, their disgust, and their disbelief. It wasn't just limited to Britain. People around the world were watching the video and reacting. Veterans groups spoke up first, calling Eric's behavior deeply insulting. News websites picked up the story and added details. They talked about the history of the Royal Guard, their discipline, their service to the country, and how they were not entertainers but soldiers. Eric, they said, had treated a symbol of British pride like a joke. Back in the cell, Eric didn't know the full storm brewing outside, but he did start to feel it. He began thinking about everything: the guard's face, the stomp, the shout, the cold stares from the crowd, his friend's silence. He replayed every second in his mind, hoping he could go back and undo it. But it was too late. A few hours later, a police officer brought him a small sandwich and a cup of water. Eric asked, "What's going to happen to me?" The officer looked at him carefully and said, "You're likely facing charges. We'll speak to your lawyer tomorrow." "But it was just a prank," Eric whispered. The officer didn't reply, simply shut the cell door again. Alone in the cell, Eric lay down. On the bench, the room was quiet. only sound was the echo of footsteps in the hallway. His back hurt and his thoughts wouldn't stop. This was nothing like the fun travel adventure he imagined. This was a disaster. And worse, it was his own fault. He thought about Private Thomas Weller, the guard he had thrown the coffee at. He didn't know his name yet, but he remembered the man's face, focused, still proud. That man had not moved until duty told him to. That man didn't react with anger or rage, even though he had every reason to. That man had stood for something bigger than himself. Eric had tried to bring him down with a joke, but all he had done was reveal his own immaturity. That night, Eric didn't sleep much. The cold bench, the stress, and the regret all kept him awake. Every minute felt like an hour. He wanted to talk to someone, his parents, his friends, even the police, just to explain that he wasn't a bad person. He had made a mistake. But would anyone believe him? Would anyone care? The next morning, an officer came in and told him he'd be meeting a legal advisor soon. Well, till then, he had to stay in the cell. Eric nodded quietly. He was no longer the loud, confident prankster. He wasn't thinking about views or followers anymore. His only thoughts now were about what would happen next, how he would ever fix this. He finally understood what others had tried to tell him before. Not everything is for entertainment. Some things deserve respect, and sometimes the cost of a laugh is just too high. Eric sat on the hard bench in the holding cell, his head resting against the cold wall. His hands were still sore from the tightness of the handcuffs, and his mind was a storm of regret, fear, and confusion. He kept replaying the moment over, and over the walk up to the guard, the smirk on his face, the coffee flying through the air, and the guard's sudden, firm stomp forward. The way people looked at him after that, like he was not funny but disgusting, that memory didn't fade. It grew louder with every hour he sat alone. The next morning, a lawyer finally came to speak with him. Her name was Rebecca Shaw, a serious woman in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a calm voice. She introduced herself and sat across from him in a small interview room. She opened a folder and looked at Eric. "Do you understand the charges against you?" she asked. Eric nodded slowly. He said, "I assaulted a soldier, but it was just cold coffee. I didn't hurt him." Rebecca didn't smile. "Eric, this is the United Kingdom. It's throwing liquid at someone, especially someone in uniform, and on duty is legally considered assault. And you did it to a member of the Queen's Guard in front of Buckingham Palace. That's not a small thing here." Eric lowered his head. "It was just a prank for a video." She sighed. "That's part of the problem. The video went viral. The entire country has seen it, and many people are angry. The media is all over this story. You're being painted as a disrespectful foreigner who came to mock their traditions." Eric swallowed hard. "Is it really that bad?" "Yes," she said honestly. "It's worse than you think." Rebecca explained that the incident had already appeared in major British newspapers and news channels. Websites were running headlines like, "American tourist disrespects Royal Guard and internet clown faces legal action for Buckingham. Palace prank." Online reactions were harsh. Many people demanded Eric be banned from the UK permanently. Some said he should be jailed. "Your face is all over the internet," Rebecca said. "You've become a symbol of what people see as the worst kind of tourist, loud, rude, and thoughtless." Eric felt like the floor had disappeared under him. Just a few days ago, he was laughing with friends, planning his next video. Now he was at the center of a growing scandal. Didn't even know that his own country had started reporting on the incident. American media had picked it up too. TV channels and websites showed the video with titles like "Viral Prankster Causes International Outrage." But it wasn't just the internet that was reacting. Real consequences had already started appearing. His university back home, which had once shared his travel videos proudly on their student blog, removed all mentions of him.
Ow.
One of his professors tweeted that Eric's actions were a disgrace to the values we teach. Sponsors small. Companies that had paid him for promoting their travel gear and phone accessories sent emails ending their contracts. He had never thought that a few seconds of bad judgment would ruin everything he had built. His online accounts, which once had thousands of followers, were now filled with hateful comments. "You're disgusting. Apologize to that guard. You make Americans look bad." Many of his followers unfollowed him within hours. He He had always dreamed of going viral, but not like this. What made it worse was what he learned about the guard, Private Thomas Weller. At first, Eric didn't care who the man was. To him, the guard had just been a stiff figure in a red coat. But now, the media had found out more about him. And his story touched people deeply. Private Thomas Weller wasn't just a ceremonial guard. He had served as a real soldier. He had been deployed in Afghanistan and had lost a friend to a roadside bomb. He had chosen to join the Queen's Guard after returning from combat, wanting to serve with honor and discipline in his home country. He had a wife and a young daughter, and he took his duty seriously, not just because of the rules, but because of what it meant to represent the Queen and the country. When reporters asked him for a comment, Thomas didn't say much. He simply released a short statement. "I stand proud in my uniform, and I serve with respect. I hope the young man who disrespected that understands what honor means one day." That single sentence hit Eric like a punch. The guard hadn't yelled. He hadn't demanded punishment. He had simply stood tall and quiet, just like he had during the prank. And he still showed more dignity than Eric had in the whole trip. Eric sat in the holding cell with tears in his eyes. Not from fear, but from shame. For the first time, he saw the man behind the uniform. It's not just a statue or a target for laughs, but a human being, a soldier, a father, someone who had put his life on the line for his country. When Rebecca returned later that day, she told him the police had finished their investigation. He would face a court hearing. The charges were disorderly conduct and assault. The good news was that the coffee wasn't hot and the guard wasn't injured, so the charges were less severe. But the damage to his reputation was huge. "You need to show real regret," Rebecca advised him. "Not because you were caught, but because you understand the harm you caused." Eric nodded. "I do. I really do." That evening, Eric was allowed to make another call. He dialed his mother. When she answered, her voice was worried and full of emotion. "Eric, are you okay?" He didn't know what to say at first. Then, he simply whispered, "I messed up, Mom." She didn't scold him. She just listened as he told her everything. When he finished, she said gently, "People make mistakes, honey, but how you fix it matters more." Over the next few days, Eric wrote an apology letter. It wasn't for the public. It was meant for Private Weller. In the letter, he explained that he had never intended to hurt or humiliate him. He wrote about how he had always thought pranks were funny until now, when he realized the difference between making people laugh and making someone feel small. He thanked the guard for his service and said he would carry the guilt of his mistake with him forever. The letter was delivered through legal channels. Eric didn't know if Private Weller ever read it, but writing it made him think deeply about his actions and the kind of person he wanted to become. When the day of the court hearing arrived, Eric was nervous beyond anything he'd ever felt. He stood in front of a British judge, wearing a borrowed suit, his hair neatly combed. Rebecca stood beside him. The courtroom was quiet, but cameras clicked outside. Reporters were watching. Every word spoken that day would be written about, analyzed, and shared. The prosecutor spoke first, describing the event, the video, and how Eric had thrown coffee at a soldier representing the crown. He called it an act of thoughtless disrespect. Eric felt every word like a stone. Then it was Eric's turn. He stood up, his hands shaking. He read from a prepared statement. He apologized not just to the guard, but to the entire country. He said he had learned that not all jokes are harmless, and that true maturity comes from knowing when not to laugh. He didn't try to excuse his actions. He simply said he was sorry and that he was ready to accept the consequences. When the judge spoke, his words were firm, but fair. He said Eric had clearly acted foolishly and shown poor judgment, but he also acknowledged that Eric was young, had no criminal record, and had shown genuine remorse. The judge sentenced Eric to a suspended fine, 100 hours of community service, and immediate deportation. He was also banned from entering the UK for 5 years. Eric felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. He wasn't going to prison, but The punishment still felt heavy and it was meant to. As he left the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. He didn't answer. He just kept walking, his head low. The next day, Eric boarded a plane back to the United States. He didn't post any pictures. He didn't film any videos. Just looked out the window, thinking about everything that had happened. His face, once full of excitement and ego, was now quiet, older, humbled. He had gone to London, looking for a viral moment, and he got one. But what he also got was a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Eric Dawson had never been inside a courtroom before. He had only seen courtrooms in movies or TV shows, where dramatic music played and judges shouted. But now he stood quietly in a real courtroom, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit him, facing real consequences. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. There were no cameras allowed inside, but he knew that journalists were sitting in the back rows, taking notes, ready to publish every word he said. The sound of people turning pages and whispering made the room feel even colder. His lawyer, Rebecca Shaw, stood next to him. She looked calm, but Eric knew she had warned him that this moment could decide his future. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Then the room went silent. The judge, an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes, looked at Eric carefully. He didn't seem angry, but he didn't seem friendly either. He looked like a man who had seen many mistakes in his courtroom and was now about to decide what kind of person Eric truly was. The court clerk read out the charges: assault and disorderly conduct in a public place. Eric swallowed hard. He had heard those words before, but they sounded heavier now, like chains. The prosecutor stood up and began to speak. She was a woman in her 40s, and her voice was clear and firm. She showed the video of the prank to the court, the exact moment when Eric threw the coffee at the Royal Guard. Everyone in the courtroom saw it again, the smirk on Eric's face. The splash of coffee and the guard's unmoving reaction followed. By the powerful stomp and warning shout, the prosecutor didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her words were sharp and precise. She said Eric's actions showed disrespect, not only to the guard, but to an important symbol of British tradition. The Queen's Guard represents duty, honor, and service, she said. To attack that with such careless behavior is not simply a childish prank. It is an insult to the country and the values we stand for. Eric's head dropped a little lower. The prosecutor then read out statements from witnesses. One was from a mother who had been there with her children. She said, "My kids were frightened. They didn't understand why someone would do something so mean to a soldier." Another was from an elderly man who had served in the military. "It hurt to see someone mock a man who stands there with pride." Protecting our history, he said. Eric could feel every word hitting him like a wave. These weren't just angry internet comments anymore. These were real people who had seen what he did, and who felt hurt and offended by it. When the prosecutor finished, it was Rebecca's turn to speak. Yes. She stood up slowly and looked directly at the judge. Her tone was calm and respectful. "Your Honor, my client is not a criminal. He is a young man who made a very poor decision. Yes, but one made out of ignorance, not malice. He did not understand the deep meaning behind the Queen's Guard, or the seriousness of the tradition he disrupted. Since the incident, he has shown real remorse. He has written a letter of apology, both to the soldier and to the country. He has lost his reputation, his income, and the respect of many. He is not asking to escape punishment, but he is asking for a chance to learn from it." Then Eric stood up. His hands were shaking, but he took a deep breath and began to read from a paper he had written the night before. His voice was quiet at first, but as he spoke, he found strength in his words. "I came to London thinking I was funny," he said. "I thought I was making people laugh. Never thought I was hurting anyone, but I was wrong. I didn't just disrespect a guard, I disrespected a person, a soldier, a country, and a tradition I didn't understand." He paused, his voice cracking slightly. Then he continued, "I have watched that video over and over. Every time I feel more ashamed. I can see how wrong I was. I can see how immature I was. And I am truly sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to make it clear, I've learned something that I will carry with me forever. The courtroom was still, and the judge didn't speak for a moment. Then he leaned forward and began to give his verdict. He said Eric's behavior had been thoughtless and offensive, and that the court did not take the matter lightly. The uniform that soldier wears is not just fabric, the judge said. It is history, it is sacrifice, it is pride. And to throw coffee at that is to throw coffee at everything it stands for. But then the judge added something unexpected. However, I also believe in second chances. You are young and you have taken responsibility for your actions. That matters. He sentenced Eric to 100 hours of community service, a suspended fine, and immediate deportation. Eric was also banned from entering the United Kingdom for 5 years. He wasn't going to jail, but he wasn't getting away easy either. The punishment would stay with him, and so would the shame. When the hearing ended, Eric stepped outside the court building. Reporters rushed toward him, flashing cameras and shouting questions. Do you regret what you did? What would you say to the guard now? Do you think your career is over? Eric didn't say anything. He just walked past them, head low. His lawyer gently guided him through the crowd and into a car. On the drive to the airport, Eric looked out the window at the city. It felt different now. The buildings looked colder. The people looked more distant. He realized he hadn't seen anything of London, really. He had come here looking for a quick video, not for knowledge or culture. And in the end, he left with something. Much deeper than any tourist photo, he left with a lesson that would never leave him. At the airport, everything felt surreal. It was quiet inside the terminal. As people moved around him, minding their own business. No one knew who he was here. For a moment, he wished he could just disappear and be normal again. When the plane took off, Eric looked down at the city lights. Below, he thought about his parents, his friends, and the guard he had disrespected. He thought about the crowd, the booze, the courtroom, and the letter he had written. He thought about how different his life had been just a few days ago. When he landed back in the United States, there were no fans waiting. No applause, no sponsors. His social media accounts were still active, but they were flooded with hate. The internet never forgot, and his video was still being shared as an example of what not to do. He stayed in his apartment for days, barely speaking to anyone. His friends didn't call. His inbox was full of angry messages. His sponsors didn't just cancel, they blocked him. He felt alone for the first time in years. It was quiet, and he had time to think. That quiet turned out to be important. He had time to reflect, not just on the prank, but on everything that led to it, his need for attention, his obsession with going viral, his lack of understanding. He had spent so much time chasing views that he had forgotten the value of respect. One day, he took a deep breath and logged out of all his accounts. He deleted most of his old videos. Then he opened a blank document and started to write jokes, not scripts, but a long, honest post. A post about what he had done, what he had learned, and what he wanted to become. He posted it as a final message and closed his channel for good. Later, he reached out to organizations that supported veterans. He began volunteering not to repair his image, but because he wanted to understand what he had once mocked. He listened to soldiers' stories, learned about sacrifice, about discipline, about silence and pain and honor. He didn't record these experiences. He didn't take selfies. He just listened. Months passed. People stopped talking about the incident. News stories filled the news. New scandals took over the internet, but Eric never forgot. He never wanted to. He was no longer a prankster. He was just a man trying to do better. And though he still carried the shame of his mistake, he also carried something else: humility. The kind that doesn't come from reading books or hearing advice, but from making a real mistake, choosing to grow from it. That was the real punishment. And also the beginning of something better. After Eric returned to the United States, nothing felt the same anymore. His apartment was quiet, his phone barely buzzed, and his friends kept their distance. The once colorful life he had built with laughter, travel, and videos now seemed gray and silent. He stayed inside for days, barely eating, barely talking, and spending most of his time staring at the walls or thinking about what had happened in London. He didn't recognize himself anymore. The funny, confident guy who joked on camera was now a man filled with shame. Eric tried to open his social media apps again, but the moment he did, hundreds of angry comments popped up. Some were harsh, some were cruel, some were even threatening. But the worst ones were the ones that told the truth, the ones that said he didn't understand respect, that he had embarrassed his own country, that he had turned someone's pride into a joke. He knew those people were right. He had no way to defend himself because deep inside, he agreed with them. He deleted the apps, shut off his phone, and sat on his bed. He had been so proud of his online presence. It was how he felt seen, how he felt important. Now it felt like poison. All that time he had spent chasing likes and views, it all led to one terrible moment, a moment that would follow him for years. He didn't know what to do next. He had no job. His sponsors had dropped him. His college didn't want to be associated with him anymore. Even some of his professors had publicly commented on his behavior, calling it a sad example of social media obsession. He had no idea how to fix things. The world had seen his worst moment, and now it seemed like no one wanted to give him a second chance. But deep down, he wanted to change. Not just because he got caught, not to win back fans or make people like him again. This time, he wanted to change because he realized who he had become, and he didn't like that person. He didn't want to be someone who made fun of others to feel powerful. He didn't want to be someone who laughed at tradition just to go viral one day. After a week of sitting in silence, Eric opened his laptop and searched for veteran support organizations. He remembered the face of the Royal Guard Private Thomas Weller and how proud he had looked even after the prank. Eric couldn't forget how the guard had stayed calm, how he didn't react with anger, how he had stood for something greater than himself. Eric didn't know how to reach him directly, but he thought maybe he could start by learning about the kind of men and women like him. He found a local group that worked with veterans, men and women who had served in the military and now needed help adjusting to normal life. Some needed housing, some needed jobs, and some just needed someone to talk to. Eric didn't know what he could offer, but he sent an email anyway. He told them who he was. He told them what he had done. And then he wrote, "I want to help if you'll let me. Want to listen and learn." He didn't expect a reply. But a few days later, a man named Jake called him. Jake was a former soldier who now ran support programs for retired veterans. His voice was calm and kind. "I saw your video," he said. "But I also read your apology. You want to help? Then show me you're serious." Jake invited Eric to one of their weekend events, a gathering where veterans came together to share meals, talk, and support each other. Eric agreed, but he was nervous. When he arrived, some people recognized him. A few stared. One man whispered, "That's the guy from London." But no one shouted. No one laughed. Jake introduced him to the group. "This is Eric. He made a mistake, but he's here to listen, not talk." That was Eric's first step. He didn't try to explain himself. He didn't defend his past. He just listened. He sat with a woman who had lost her leg in combat and now taught children how to paint. He listened to an old man talk about his memories from World War II. He listened to a young veteran who said, "It's hard when people don't take what we do seriously." That sentence hit Eric like a stone. He kept coming back every week. Slowly, people started accepting him. They saw that he wasn't there for attention. He helped set up tables, serve food, clean up after events. He helped with small tasks, carrying boxes, driving people home, making coffee. Nobody asked him to perform. Nobody asked him to be funny. They just appreciated his effort. Eric found peace in those moments. There was something pure about being useful. No camera. No followers. Just real people, real stories, real service. After 3 months of working with the veterans group, Jake invited Eric to speak at a high school. It was part of a program where veterans and volunteers talked to students about respect, discipline, and decision-making. Jake said, "You don't have to be perfect. Just be honest." Eric stood in front of a group of teenagers. He was nervous, but he didn't hide. He told them the whole story, told them about the prank, the arrest, the courtroom, the public shame, and how it all started because he wanted to be funny. He told them what he learned about respect, how some uniforms aren't costumes, how some traditions aren't jokes, and how some mistakes can't be erased with a funny caption at the end. A student raised her hand and asked, "Do you think people can forgive you?" Eric looked at her and said, "I'm not sure. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't the goal, becoming better is." That talk changed something in him. He decided to speak more often, not as a content creator, but as a cautionary tale. Schools, colleges, and youth groups started inviting him to share his story. He never made it dramatic. He didn't cry, just told the truth. And slowly, people began to see the new Eric. The internet still had videos of his mistake. But now other videos began to appear, videos of him talking to kids about online responsibility, about the weight of actions, about how not everything is a joke. He didn't become famous again, but something better happened. He became useful. One day, after nearly a year, he received a message through the veterans group. It was short. It said, "Private Weller, read your letter. He accepts your apology. He hopes you continue learning." Eric read it 3 times. He sat quietly, holding the phone, his eyes filled with tears. It was not forgiveness in words, but it was peace. It was something stronger than hate or punishment. It was a reminder that even those we hurt the most can leave a door open if we try to make things right. That night, Eric went for a walk. The air was cool, and the stars were out. Thought about the man in the red coat again, standing so still, so proud. A man he had once mocked, and who now became the reason he had changed. He no longer wanted to be seen as the prankster. That person was gone. He wanted to be someone who respected others, who understood silence, who listened more than he spoke. He didn't need followers anymore. He just needed purpose. And though his journey had begun with a mistake that nearly ruined him, it was that very mistake that taught him what truly mattered. Not being seen, but being worthy of being seen. Not being followed, but being someone worth following. And that he knew now was no joke at all.